Shambolic. Screwed. Not my words, but those of the former Shadow Europe Minister and the former UK Ambassador to the EU, after the Brexit Secretary David Davis said MPs wouldn't get to vote on the deal until after the UK leaves. Number 10 slapped him down. His own department had to clarify his statement. It did not look good. It made former New York Mayor Mike Bloomberg's verdict that Brexit was the stupidest decision any country has made until the US trumped them seem only too kind. Business is understandably beginning to panic. They have to move fast. They have to plan and make decisions, but they can't. The uncertainty is killing the vital financial services sector, and they are already voting with their feet, activating plans to move abroad. And can you blame them? They can't stall in neutral forever. They can't wait around for an indefinite transition period, perhaps followed by a cliff edge. We need a deal in the next few months before companies up sticks and scarper across the globe. I don't think that's what global Britain was meant to mean.
So I agree with you in the sense that we need to create certainty as soon as possible. So I think it was absolutely disgraceful that no proper thought was put into the prospects of Brexit whilst we was having this referendum period. It seems to me like nobody in power actually thought that Brexit would happen, and there was no planning at all for what that might look like. The fact we took so long to implement Article 50 was just utterly bizarre. And this whole thing is dragging out. I get very concerned that we've not been able to move on to trade talks yet, purely because it seems that we're so hung up about how much money the EU is going to receive. I think it is ridiculous that they are stalling the talk so strongly based on that money. I also sympathise with business to the point of course, they need to understand the trading conditions to plan for the future things. But I also think a lot of businesses use Brexit as an excuse. So I remember, literally about a month or so after the referendum, one of the big key banks came out and announced a redundancy programme and blamed it on Brexit uncertainty. It wasn't true. That was a part of an ongoing efficiency drive that a business was doing. I could name the bank, but I won't. So people often use Brexit as a way of burying bad news and blaming poor performance. Okay. A lot of other people will have a lack of certain sympathy with the financial services because they didn't care too much about the impact on ordinary people when they contributed to the crash in 2008. But what I would say is, as my final point, we need to focus on, there's going to be so many changes to the economy in terms of technology and stuff, and we're focusing so much on how do we keep business as it is today, post-Brexit. We need to be focusing about what do we want our economy to look like post-Brexit, where are the new opportunities, and how can we innovate as well? You look confused.
But Michelle, no, I think we've got to deal slightly with a more immediate problem, which is that financial services, which is 11% of the GDP, is voting with its feet. And most banks are already planning to move between 15 and 25% of their workforce to support. If you don't mind a 10-year years of austerity, then that's fine. All I'm arguing for is that David Davis actually gives and Theresa May together don't leave business in the dark. Now, I'm not being particularly ideological. I'm being pragmatic. This is we all have to live and work in this country, Carol. It's not.
I get it. No, I get it.
It's like believing in Father Christmas.
You're saying that business is suffering. No, it isn't. There's 306 business leaders wrote to the Daily Telegraph. Let me read.
That was in 2016, before the referendum, and they still haven't had any clarity and certainty.
No, it wasn't. Well, what they said was it was Britain's competitiveness is being undermined by our membership of a failing EU.
That was May 2016.
So what? They don't want to be in it.
That was before the referendum. And what we're talking about now, Carol.
So let's talk about the financial. Let's talk about the financial services that you're talking about now. You're saying that banks are preparing to move people to Europe. They have to move some people to Europe because we're not going to be in Europe anymore. So those banks have to have a presence there. But no one is leaving this country, Rachel. If you move a little percentage of your workforce, you're not leaving. In terms of the city, The city is we're the number one in the world, and we will remain.
Good. No, I hope so.
We will
Carol.
remain there.
I seriously hope you're right.
Okay, well let me talk. There are assets that we can never lose. We can't lose the language. We can't lose the time zone. We have an unrivaled pool of talent in the city. They're going nowhere. And the businesses, what businesses are you talking about?
What about Lloyd Blankfein, the head of Goldman Sachs, who said he was going to spend much more time?
What about Deutsche Bank, who actually said...
Can I just do a very quick Father Christmas, sorry to any viewers who are surprised, myth-busting. These figures don't lie.
English.
So this is GDP growth in 2016.
Okay.
UK had the highest rate of GDP growth in the OECD.
Yeah.
2017, we've slipped to 4th place, and we are the only ones whose growth has actually fallen. Now, I know there are lots of competing statistics about how we are doing, but that doesn't lie.
We've had 5... No, I want to correct that. We've had 5 consecutive quarters of growth. We've done a 1.9% growth in the last 12 months. That's more than was predicted and more was expected.
Pointing out was when we dropped... The EU has been fantastic for us in terms of growth, but now we are bottom of the growth league. But that's fine.
1.9%.
Yes, hello, Nick. Hello.
If they hadn't voted Brexit, you'd have nothing to bloody well talk about. All you ever... When I get the briefing notes, I get Michelle, I get Rachel, Brexit, every bloody week. Now, let's put this in context. You quote Michael Bloomberg. And I was fortunate enough to spend time with Michael Bloomberg this week when he opened his £1 billion offices by the Mansion House in the City of London. And he's right. But again, that's been taken quite out of context because he said the same thing to me. But he said this. The idea everybody's going to chase off to Frankfurt from the city is ridiculous. The population of Frankfurt equals the population of the London borough of Croydon. That's the whole thing. And as Carol rightly says, there's a bit, but there's not a lot of English spoken. English is the language of the city. So as Michael Bloomberg says, I'm quoting, is London going to take a knock? Yes, it will take a knock. But will it have the drive and the means? Yes. Why do you suppose he's built offices that currently can take 4,000 staff, that will take 4,000?
When do you think he took the decision?
No, hold on. No, and he's built it. There will now be 7,000 staff. This is an extraordinarily global, nimble person. If he really thought the writing was on the wall for London, and I don't blame him, he'd be out of there. He'd have pulled the plug on it. There are tough times. Of course there are tough times. This is not going to be a slam dunk. I don't think anybody ever said it was going to be a slam dunk.
No, it's not. Can we just pause and hear what Carolyn Fairbairn, the Director General of the CBI, has to say?
It is very difficult running a business right now. And I think there are 2 things. One is the uncertainty of not knowing the final outcome. But secondly, the fear that the final outcome might be WTO terms, because that does mean 22% tariffs on food. That does mean that services firms don't have access to the European Union and vice versa. So these are real challenges for firms today. And I think what we're increasingly seeing is that they're making decisions now that are affecting investment, that's affecting jobs. So it's very urgent.
So what she's saying is, because Article 50, we've only got 17 months left, there is every likelihood that the deal will time out. We will leave the EU possibly without one, let alone having MPs able to vote on the deal, because there won't have been a deal by the time we leave, which means that our very, very strong services sector will not be able to trade in Europe because WTO does not apply to services. Yes, meanwhile, goods will have tariffs of 22%.
Is it just like I'm not here?
It's not going to be brilliant.
We can trade with WTO immediately. The WTO released a statement at the end of last year saying there will be no disruption. We can trade the nanosecond that we leave the EU. They made that statement. We're members of the WTO. We're one of the founding members.
Do you really think that would be a good outcome?
Yes, I do. I do, yeah.
I want to say a couple of things. So first of all, there's not a full single market for the services economy at the moment anyway, so that they're talking about that. Also, as well, she represents the CBI and they take an element of their funding from the European Union as well. So I'm always a little bit cautious about listening to the representatives of business groups. There are lots of businesses that will be very happy to see a release, for example, of a lot of the red tape. I was earlier on in a stockroom.
That will happen if we don't have the EU withdrawal bill, which is another possibility, which incorporates our red tape. Yeah, go on.
I was hanging around in a stockroom with 2 young men earlier on.
Oh, not again.
Here I am. You can't see the young men because they're behind the camera.
But you're in a...
Do you know what that paper represents? I shall tell you if you don't.
Love letters to you.
Yes. How did you know? Is everyone queuing up, trying to get on a date with me? I've not had time to open them. I apologise.
Red tape. What is it?
It's basically, there's so much EU law, this is according to Professor Tim Congdon, that it would fill 120,000 pages of A4, which is what I'm seated comfortably upon there. So there's a lot of businesses that actually
I know, but Michelle, you're arguing against yourself because the EU withdrawal bill incorporates all this red tape, and it's up to ministers, as we know, to strike it out using their Henry VIII clauses. Anyway, Afra.
I was just going to say, there is a lot of EU law, but that's the reality of doing business in a global marketplace.
For 40 years.
If we leave the EU, we will, as you pointed out, replace it with more laws that we're going to have to make bilaterally with different countries. The idea that we can just rip up the laws, have this clean slate and do what we like. This is the fantasy that is being peddled to people.
And it's
very ironic that a Conservative government, the party of business, is peddling this, because it's businesses that are going to suffer.
Do you really think other countries are going to stop doing business with us?
Do you really think that you're going to escape from red tape when you're going to have 10... It's going to probably take 10 years to untangle it.
Well, how is it going to... You say this every time. How is it going to take 10 years?
I'm so bored.